Chapter 2, Lesson 5, Compare and Order Fractions, Decimals, and Percents. You will be able to compare and order fractions, decimals, and percents. Step 1, when you're comparing fractions only. The easiest thing to do is to make them common denominators and then simply compare them. So you're going to find the least common denominator. It's the same thing as the least common multiple, it's just for denominators specifically of fractions. Then you'll write equivalent fractions using the least common denominator, and then simply just compare the two numerators. So fill in each box with less than, greater than, or equal to make the statement true. So we need to look at 8 and 12. We need to find a common denominator. So let's do our factor trees for 8 and 12. 8 is 2 and 4, which can be broken down into 2 and 2, and I'm going to bring that 2 down. 12 is 3 and 4, and 4 can be broken down into 2 and 2, and bring down that 3. Remember, to find least common multiple, find what's in common first. Looks like we have 2 2's in common. And then bring down everything left over. Well, everything left over, we have another 2 and a 3. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 3 is 24. So your least common denominator is 24. So we need to make these equivalent fractions. I need them both to have a denominator of 24. Well, how do you get from 8 to 24? To get from 8 to 24, you times 3. So you do the same on the numerator, times 3. And 5 times 3 is 15. In the second fraction, we go from 12 to 24, and we get there by multiplying by 2. And we do the same in the numerator. 7 times 2 is 14. So we're comparing 15 over 24 and 14 over 24. Now that they have the same denominator, I can clearly see that 15 is greater than 14, which means this is a greater than symbol. Let's do another example. Letter B. Look at your denominators. You have 3 and 9. I'm going to do this one up a little bit. 3 is a prime number, so that's the only factor. And 9 can be broken down into 3 and 3. You have a 3 in common and a 3 left over, which means the least common multiple is 9. Make your new fractions with the denominator of 9. How did you get from 3 to 9? You do that by multiplying by 3. And you're going to do the same to the numerator. 2 times 3 is 6. How do you get in the second fraction from 9 to 9? Well, that's an easy one. We multiply by 1. And we do the same in the numerator, which gives us 4. Now you are comparing 6 and 4. 6 is bigger. Therefore, it is greater than. Letter C. 5/12 and 7/8. We need to compare 12 and 8, our denominators. 12 can be broken down into 6 and 2. 6 is 3 and 2. Bring down the other 2. 8 is 4 and 2, which is 2 and 2. Bring down the 2. Looks like 2 2's are in common. And the leftovers. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 3 is 24. So again, we have another one with 24. Make your two common denominators. And how do you get from 12 to 24? You multiply by 2. Do the same to the numerator. 5 times 2 is 10. To get from 8 to 24, we multiply by 3. So we do the same to the numerator. We multiply by 3. 7 times 3 is 21. Simply, now we are going to look at our numerators. 10 is definitely smaller than 21, which means this is less than. 5/12 is less than 7/8. Letter D, we have 6 and 18. 6 is 2 and 3. 18 is 9 and 2. And 9 can be broken down into 3 and 3. I'm going to bring down that 2. Looks like they have a 2 in common and a 3 in common. And bring down the leftovers, which is a 3. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 3 is 18. Our least common denominator is 18. So we'll rewrite them with 18 as the denominator. How do you get from 6 to 18? You multiply by 3, and you do the same to the numerator. 1 times 3 is 3. How do you get from 18 to 18? Well, you multiply by 1. Do the same to the numerator, and you get 5. Compare 3 and 5. 5 is bigger. Therefore, 1/6 is less than 5/18. Now, when we order the fractions, we need to get them all to be the same denominator. So this might take up a little bit of room. We need to find the least common denominator or least common multiple of all of these denominators. Okay, make sure you write a little bit small for this one. All right, we need to compare 2, which is just 2, 14, which can be broken down into 7 and 2, 4, which can be broken down into 2 and 2, and 7, which is just 7. So these are my 4 denominators, 2, 14, 4, and 7. What's in common with all of them? There's nothing in common with all of them, so just look and see if any of them have something in common. Well, it looks like I have a 2 in common with 3 of them, so I'll write that once. It also looks like I have a 7 in common. I'll write that once. And then there's a lonely 2. 2 times 7 is 14, and 14 times 2 is 28. So our least common denominator is 28. Now this one I like to do a little bit differently. I'm going to list my fractions vertically. We have 1/2, 9/14, we've got 3/4, and we've got 5/7. I need to make equivalent fractions. And the denominator must all be 28. So think to yourself, how do you get from 2 to 28? Well, you multiply by 14, and you do the same in the numerator, and you get 14. Next one, how do you get from 14 to 28? Well, you multiply by 2, do the same in the numerator, multiply by 2, and 9 times 2 is 18. How do you get from 4 to 28? You multiply by 7, Do the same in the numerator. 3 times 7 is 21. Oops. Meant to do that in red. And the last one, 7 to 28, you multiply by 4. You do the same up top and multiply by 4. 5 times 4 is 20. Now we have them all with the same denominator. And we are ordering them from least to greatest. So here's what I like to do. Since they're all the same denominator, you can just look at the numerators. Which one is the smallest? This one is the smallest, so I'm going to mark that with a number 1. Then we go to 18 28ths, 20 28ths, and 21 28ths. That's separate. Now we have the order from least to greatest, 1, 2, 3, and 4. However, the very last step, which is very important, you need to rewrite them in the original form, so in this case, purple. My number 1, originally, all the way to the left, is 1/2. That's the first fraction I write. Number 2, originally, is 9/14. Number 3, originally, is 5/7. And number 4, originally, is 3/4. You must write them in the original form. But that is how you order fractions. Letter B. I'm going to do the same thing. Let's find our least common denominators. Look at all your denominators. I've got 2, which is just 2. 6, which is 2 and 3. I've got 3, which is just 3. And I've got 5, which is just 5. What's in common with all of them? Nothing. Anything in common anywhere else? Yep, I've got a 2 in common. I've got a 3 in common. And a lonely 5. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30. The least common denominator is 30. So start by writing your original fractions. 1/2, 5/6, and again I like to write them vertically. 2/3, and 3/5. We need to make common denominators, which we now know is 30. So make sure all of these fractions have a denominator of 30. How do you get from 2 to 30? Let's start with our first fraction. We multiply by 15 and do the same in the numerator. So we get 15/30. The second fraction, 6 to 30, you multiply by 5. Do the same in the numerator and get 25. From 3 to 30, you multiply by 10. Do the same in the numerator and you get 20. And lastly, to get from 5 to 30, we multiply by 6. Do the same up top. 3 times 6 is 18. We are still numbering from least to greatest, so compare the numbers. 15/30 is the smallest. Then we have 18/30, 20/30, and 25/30. Last step is to write them in the original form. The original form, number 1, is 1/2. And number 2 is 3/5. Number 3 is 2/3. And lastly, number 4 is 5/6. And that is our answer from least to greatest. Now let's compare not just fractions, but fractions, decimals, and percents. Fill in each box with less than, greater than, or equal to make a true statement. Helpful hint, change them to one format. And decimals are usually the easiest to do. So let's take a look here. Fractions, as you saw before on the front of this worksheet, fractions take a lot of time, especially when you have 4 fractions. So what's easiest, I feel, is to change them all to decimals. So we're going to do just that. Well, in letter A, 0.7 is already a decimal. Half my work is done. Now we need to find the decimal for 3/4. You can use your shortcut method and change the denominator to a power of 10. You can change to the power of 10, which is 100. And think to yourself, 4 to 100 is times 25. And do the same up top. And 3 times 25 is 75. Which makes our fraction 75 hundredths, and our decimal exactly that, 75 hundredths, or 0.75. And then we have 0.7. It might be easier to look at these vertically, so let me put 0.7 underneath here and see if that helps. Now, it's missing a digit here, which we would automatically fill in with 0. If there's nothing there, it's a 0. Now tell me, look at digit by digit. Zeros are the same, 7s are the same. 5 is bigger. So this number is bigger, which means it's the greater than symbol. When you are lining up your numbers, make sure your decimal points are always lined up. Letter B, you can use your shortcut for 85%. The decimals at the end, move it 2 to the left. You get 0.85. And 7/8 we are going to have to divide. 8 can't go into 7. Add a decimal point and a 0. 8 into 7, 8 times, which is 64. Subtract and get 6. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 60 7 times, which is 56. Subtract and get 4. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times exactly. Minus 40 is 0. So this is 0.875. Again, I like to line them up vertically, so I'll just line up with my decimal point, 0.875. And if you look, this blue number has more digits than the green number, so we're going to add in a filler 0. Compare digit by digit. 0s, 8s, 5, and 7. The 7 is definitely bigger, which means this number is definitely bigger, and we open our symbol to the bigger number. Letter C, 2/3. Again, 3 doesn't go into a power of 10, so we're going to have to do some long division. 3 goes into 2 0 times. Add a decimal point and a 0. 3 goes into 20 6 times. Minus 18 is 2. Bring down a 0. 3 goes into 20 6 times. Minus 18 is 2. Bring down a 0. This is just going to keep repeating. So this is actually what we call a repeating decimal. So we can stop right there. This is 0.66. And this other one is already a decimal, so let's write it right underneath. 0.6. Fill in the gap with a 0. And compare digit by digit. 0s, 6, 6 and 0. Our larger number is this one, which is the 2/3, which means it's the greater than symbol. Letter D, With percents, we can still use our trick. The decimal points all the way to the right. Move it 2 to the left. We get 0.07. And 7/10 is a nice and easy one. We know how to read it and write it. 7/10 is 0.7. Let's line up our decimals on one on top of the other. And remember, there's an understood 0 in front of every decimal point. So let's bring the 0.7 and line it up. 0.7. When I say line it up, again, I mean line up the decimal points. As you can see in all of these problems, the decimal point is lined up. And we're going to put in a filler 0. Compare the digits. 0, 0, and 7. The 7 is bigger, okay, which is this number over here. So it's the less than symbol. And now we need to order fractions, decimals, and percents. Same type of situation with ordering. Again, we want them in the same format, which I still believe is decimals. Now letter A, I'm going to use my resources a little bit. I already figured out what 2/3 was as a decimal. If you look back, 2/3 as a decimal is 0.66. So let's jot that one down. I'm going to list them like I did before. So 2/3, and then we have 60%, and then we have 0.62. And let's change those all to decimals. 2/3 we know to be 0.66. 60%, we can use our trick and move the decimal point 2 to the left. So it's 0.60. And 0.62 is a decimal, so 0.62 stays the same. We are ordering from least to greatest. Compare each digit. Zeros, 6s are the same, and then we have 602. 0 is the smallest, so I'm going to mark that with the number 1. Then the 2, then the 6. As before, we need to write them in their original form, which is why I like listing them. Our first number is 60%. Our second number is 0.62. And our third number in original form is 2/3. And that's our order from least to greatest. Letter B. 1/5, I'm going to have to do some math for that. I'm going to change the fraction. I'll do it up here. I can change it to a power of 10. In fact, that power of 10 is 10. To get from 5 to 10, I multiply by 2. I'm going to do the same up top and multiply by 2. There we go. Let's fix my multiplication signs. 1 times 2 is 2. So this is 2/10. Let me write this out. I'm going to go over here. 1/5, which is 2/10. Okay? And 2/10 can be written as 0.2. Then we have 0.22, which is already a decimal. So we can write it as 0.22. Try and stay as neat as possible here. 19%. We can use our shortcut and move that decimal place 2 to the left. And we would get 0.19. Now we have a gap up here, so we're going to fill in that gap with a 0. Anytime you have a gap, fill it in with a 0. We are going least to greatest, so let's find the smallest number. Compare from left to right your digits. Zeros, my decimal points are lined up. 2 to 1. 1 is definitely smaller, so that's going to be my first answer. But for the top two, I have to go to the next digit because they're the same. And then when I compare 0, 2, 0's next, and then the 2 is last. And we need to write them in their original form. Number 1 is 19%. Number 2 is 1/5. And number 3 is 0.22. And that is in order from least to greatest. Letter C. Hiroshi found that 3/5 of his class prefers vanilla ice cream, 26% prefers chocolate, and 0.14 prefers strawberry. Which kind of ice cream do students prefer the least? So in this question, we're not actually finding the order, but we need to know the smallest amount. So we're going to start the same way, we just have a little bit less work to do. We have 3/5, we have 26%, and we have 0.14. And we need to change all of these to decimals. Well, 0.14 is already a decimal, so I'm going to keep with that one. 26%, move your decimal point 2 to the left, and you get 0.26. And then with 3/5, I'm going to use my shortcut method and make it a denominator of 10. Any power of 10 would do. You multiply 2 to get there. You do the same up top and get 6/10, or it can be written as 0.6. There is a gap right here that we will fill in with a 0. Looking at these three amounts, we don't care about the order in this question. We want to know which flavor they prefer the least. Well, compare these numbers, 0, 6 to 1. This is the smallest number, but it says which kind of ice cream. Not what is the number, which kind. So let's go back and see what each of these are. Hiroshi found that 3/5 prefer vanilla, so this is vanilla. He found that 26% prefers chocolate, and 0.14 prefers strawberry. So which flavor do they prefer the least? Our answer is strawberry.